All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. So there was a PowerPoint we were going to do on Japanese atrocities during World War II, but usually I do it as a like an activity slash lecture, um, and it's a I think it's a really good activity, but it really doesn't translate into online learning very well. And that combined with the fact that I'm going to be giving you guys your last document exam this week. I think we're probably just going to skip over that one. The very shortened version is Japan did some pretty horrendous stuff during World War II, treated POWs, prisoners of war, terribly, including like executions and torture and starvation. They did testing on humans for biological and chemical weapons. Forced prostitution of people primarily in East and Southeast Asia, referred to as comfort women, and just all kinds of really, really bad stuff. So that one, unfortunately, I think we are not going to get done. But we then also have, of course, the Holocaust. And usually I find by the time we get to this one, English classes have had you guys read like Night. I think some people have mentioned they've read Boy in the Striped Pajamas. So a lot of the kind of thunder behind this has already been delivered to you guys. So I tend to give this a little bit of a briefer focus just because I've had so many students tell me already that they covered it a lot. Also, a lot of the build up to it was in our interwar years unit that we had to skip, again, for interest of time with distance learning. We have unfortunately missed out on a decent chunk of content from that. But that being said, I do want to make sure that you have a good historical understanding of what the Holocaust was and kind of how it happened. So the German name, and obviously this was in German, they didn't call it in English the final solution. It's whatever the German version of the final solution is, which I don't know because I don't speak German. But in German, the Holocaust was referred to as the final solution. And the reason why it was called the final solution is, according to Hitler, in the kind of philosophy he laid out in his book, his biography, Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. According to Hitler, Jewish people are the source of all problems in the world. And not just Jewish people, also like socialists and all of these groups down here. Like basically anybody who wasn't Aryan was the source of all the problems in the world, and specifically all the problems that Germany was having. So the solution to those problems was to get rid of them. And this started out really light when Hitler was gaining power. It was more like scapegoating the Jewish people and the socialists and like directing anger and hatred towards them. It then started to escalate more as Hitler actually seized power and was able to do more and more things. Most people kind of look at the official, like, this is it, like the Holocaust has started, as Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. Because that is when it became kind of official policy to round up and take away Jewish people. So basically what happened on Kristallnacht is a bunch of Jewish businesses were targeted. People broke their windows. That's why it's called the Night of Broken Glass. They dragged them out of their homes. They beat them. Some of them were killed, and many of them were arrested. And basically that's the official start of this final solution. Early on, Hitler's approach to this heavy air quotes problem was, we just need to get rid of them. And that doesn't necessarily mean kill them. So he was totally fine with deporting and allowing a lot of Jewish people to leave. The problem was Jewish people were also persecuted in other parts of Europe. They were persecuted in America. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, which is anti-Jewish racism, going around. So those Jewish people had a very hard time finding a country that would actually welcome them, and a lot of them ended up having to go back to Germany. So at that point, once Hitler starts kind of taking over more of Europe and there's nowhere else for the Jewish people to go, he realizes, all right, well, the only way I'm going to deal with this, again, heavy air quotes, problem, is just kill them all. genocide. While he's at it, he decides to deal with those other, air quotes, problem groups. And again, those include gypsies, which is a like an ethnic group. It's a minority group within especially Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Gay people, communists, disabled people, whether it's a physical or mental disability. You use them as impure and they need to be cleansed. Any racial minorities, so like specifically gypsies, then beyond them, just anybody who's not, again, Aryan. The weirdest one on the list, there was a very small number of them affected, but I add it just because it's such a, you wouldn't expect it at all, Jehovah's Witnesses. He also targeted Jehovah's Witnesses in the Holocaust. So primarily Jewish people, by far the largest single group affected was Jewish people, but almost half of the people affected by the Holocaust were actually not Jewish. They were one of these other groups, or there's smaller other groups that are part of this. These are just the main groups. So the early steps of this genocide are what you see with basically every genocide. We already saw this a little bit when we talked about the Armenian genocide. You usually don't jump right to kill everybody. What first happens is dehumanizing them and removing their protections under the law. So that starts with these things called the Nuremberg laws. And the Nuremberg laws basically say there are now different classes of citizens in Germany. There's normal, like full citizens, and those are Germans, Aryans. And then there's like kind of citizens, and those are like, partial German, partial something else. And then there's like the worst of the worst. Those are the Jewish people, the non-Germans, the people that are at the bottom. And those people have to identify themselves. For Jewish people, for example, they had to wear yellow stars to show that they were Jewish. If you were a Jewish shop owner, you would actually have to post one of those stars in your window to make people aware that this is a Jewish shop. So if they didn't want to, give Jewish people business, they could skip that shop. Sometimes it even involved just outright shutting down the business or taking their property or what have you. So this escalates more and more and more until it eventually gets to that violence where they're actually rounding people up on these train cars. Which if you read Night, thinking back to high school when I read Night, I'm pretty sure there's a scene described within one of the train cars and how terrible it is with people just packed in there with so much room they can't even sit down, and it's like boiling hot inside. There's basically only these vents up at the very top to let any kind of air or not heat, the opposite of heat, cold in. I'm still sick and my brain can't think of words. I'm sorry. So people getting rounded up and shipped away to camps that they're never heard from again. Obviously, the effects of this are horrendous. This is actually a picture of a liberated concentration camp, and these are just the remaining bodies that were found there that hadn't been burned yet at the time that the camp was liberated. So this whole process, of course, is now known as the Holocaust. And I mentioned before that about half, or close to half, of the people that were killed were not Jewish. There's 11 million people killed in the Holocaust. 6 million of them are Jewish, and 5 million of them are those other groups of people. That is an enormous number of people. Obviously, 11 million, it's one of those numbers where I feel like the human brain just kind of abstracts certain numbers because they're so big. But let's actually, I'm going to kind of waffle for a second here as I look up the population of Roseville, just for a comparison of just how many people that would be. So my phone is pulling up now. All right, so according to Google, the population of Roseville in 2019 was 117,000 people. So you would have to kill everybody in Roseville 90 times approximately to get up to that number, right? Because 9 times, so that'd be about 90 times to get up to 11 million. Every single person in Roseville. 11 million is an incomprehensible amount of death to be caused in a really short amount of time. Really just a couple of years is when the majority of the killing happened during the Holocaust. There were two kinds of camps in the Holocaust. The default concentration camp is not actually a death camp. It's not like, Auschwitz and stuff like that. Concentration camps were, in theory, labor camps. And a lot of times that labor involved intentional working to the point of killing them or, executing them for not being able to work hard enough, starving them to death, those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the point of concentration camps was to get slave labor, basically. This was a huge factor in driving the German war machine, in driving the German economy. There's a lot of German businesses that profited off of this. I never want to name the wrong company here. I think it was BMW. I'm not gonna name any names to be specific, but there's a current big car making company that originated in Germany that actually benefited a lot from the Holocaust, and you can't use that to blame the current version of that company, but the version of that company at this time period. You got to wonder how much they're aware of how much blood is coming on the parts they get for their automobiles. So regardless, concentration camps were those work camps, and the majority of people originally are going to be sent out to concentration camps. And again, people are definitely killed there, but the goal is not just killing people. The really bad ones are going to be the death camps. There is human experimentation that goes on at both. The Nazis were really big on genetic experimentation because the whole idea of eugenics and Aryanism revolves around purity in the gene pool. So they really wanted to figure out how that kind of stuff worked. And so they used the people in the camps to experiment on them, doing really, really horrendous stuff. Things like putting people in pressure chambers where you could severely raise or lower the pressure, which is a very, very painful way to die. It's basically the air crushing you to death if the pressure is raised and you kind of being pulled apart if the pressure is lowered. They tested all kinds of different drugs on them, combination of drugs. They did things like injecting chemicals into children's eyes to try to change their eye color, or, just injecting different things into different people. Like they would inject acid into the bloodstream to see what happened, or try to inject air into the bloodstream to see what happened. They also wanted to get intelligence that they could use to aid their soldiers in the field, especially how does hypothermia and frostbite affect people. So they would intentionally give people hypothermia and frostbite and then test different things on them to see how it worked. Vivisections were really common. If you don't know what a vivisection is, it is a I don't know how to say it without being very gory. You dissect somebody while they're still alive. Because when somebody is dead, their organs don't function in the same way. If you want to see how their organs function when they're alive, you have to cut them open when they're alive. And the German scientists, because they don't care about these people, they view them as subhuman. They are not going to use any kind of painkillers or anything. They literally just chop people up while they're still alive, and they can feel everything. All kinds of amputations, all these surgeries, really, really horrendous stuff. They got a lot of medical knowledge out of it. So at the end of the war, the Allies were kind of left with this awful decision of what do you do with that? Do you use that medical knowledge to help people in the future, or do you throw it all away knowing that it could help people, but it's not ethical to use it because it was obtained by testing on living human beings? The decision they came to was you can't allow that to happen, so they didn't use the research. That being said, there was this thing called Operation Paperclip during the Cold War, where the Nazis also had a lot of really good rocketry knowledge. So we forgave a lot of Nazi scientists if they would help us build rockets. And both America and Russia did that, because at that point, America and Russia were competing for power. On top of that, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that Japan did human experiments as well. Well, America and Russia were the only ones that really knew about that because Japan really covered theirs up. And because Russia was kind of shunned by the international community, America helped Japan cover that up so we could use their knowledge to benefit us. So That's not very ethical either, but definitely more ethical than actually doing what the Nazis did. It's really, really messed up stuff. So the bulk of the Holocaust and the real, like, when people talk about the Holocaust and like gas chambers and like burning bodies and stuff like that, what they're mostly talking about are death camps. And the death camps were things that came later. When Hitler realized that he was running out of time, so to speak, that they were not really winning this conflict anymore, and that there were too many Jewish people and they weren't killing them fast enough, he decided that it was time to make something that was more efficient. So the death camps were made. All of them were in Poland. So when you look at like casualty counts and death counts during World War II, you always see like this crazy high number for civilian deaths in Poland. That's because number one, a large number of Jewish people were in Poland, but number two, all of the death camps were in Poland. So that massively spikes up the numbers. And basically the way these camps would work is they would bring in a train car full of Jewish people, and they would separate them out into two lines as they came into the camp. One line, which was significantly longer, was sent into the main chamber, where they were told that they were going to, undress, and they were going to get deloused, and they were going to get showered and sent into the camp, when in reality they were being locked in a large room, which then the shower heads were removed, and gas was dropped in. There were gas pellets that reacted to the air, and then they suffocated them. The other line, which was much shorter, was the ones that were physically strong enough to do the cleanup, because the Nazi soldiers didn't want to clean up. Like, that's a huge pile of dead bodies. That is a lot of work to do. They didn't want to do it. They made the other Jewish people or, other groups clean up the bodies afterwards. So if you were in that other category, you would then be tasked with making sure everybody was dead, then dragging them to the room where they would be incinerated, checking them for any valuables, incinerating them, sifting through the ashes to check for any like golden teeth or anything like that. So I don't know. I feel like given those two options, I would rather just be in the group that died rather than having to then like sometimes you would be brought to that death camp with your family. So you get pulled out because you look like strong and healthy. Your family gets killed, and then you have to incinerate your family's bodies. So just, again, really horrific stuff. This is the activity we would usually do if we covered this more in class. But again, just because we're rapidly running out of time with the semester ending, we don't get to cover it. I would say, again, like I mentioned for the kamikaze stuff, if you are interested in learning more about this, or like if you're like trying to get more information about it, this link is just the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and they have a really good collection of firsthand accounts and like survivor narratives of stuff that went down. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., they have the actual museum itself in D.C., and it's a really, really depressing but really powerful museum to go through. You actually walk through one of the train cars. And despite me really liking history, I've never been one of those people that said, like, you go to a museum and like you could feel the history. I never really feel the history from anything. But I swear when I walked through that train car, like you could, like it actually does have like this, just this feeling to it that like I was deeply uncomfortable standing in it. I got out of it immediately. And at the end, they show a lot of those firsthand accounts of people that made it through. And the one that always stuck with me really well, and I guess I'll kind of close out on that one in the same way that the museum kind of closed out on it for me, was this this story that this man was telling. And when all of this was going down, he was a teenager. And of course, when he's telling the story, he's an elderly man, because any Holocaust survivor at this point is going to be very, very old. But he was talking about how he was fleeing with a group of other Jewish refugees. They were trying to escape the Germans. They were trying not to go to a concentration camp. And they were hiding in like this cellar as these Nazi soldiers were walking around. I think he said it was like a farm, a farm, and the Nazis were walking around looking for them. And this woman had a baby that wouldn't stop crying. And it just kept crying and crying, and no matter what they did, they couldn't stop the baby. And the guy realized that, the soldiers are going to hear this baby. They're going to find us in this cellar, and they're going to kill us all. So he grabbed the baby, and he starts rocking it, and he's holding it to him really tight. Like he's just like terrified. He's trying the best he can to get the baby to calm down. And the baby calms down, and he's like, I did it. It's a miracle. We're safe. And they're probably down there for another 10 or 15 minutes before the soldiers leave. And once the adrenaline kind of wears off and the soldiers are gone, he realizes the baby's not just being quiet, the baby's not moving at all. And he looks down and he realized that he was holding the baby so tight because he was so scared, he suffocated it to death. And just the thought of having to live with that, because realistically, if that didn't happen, the Nazis would have found them and everybody in that cellar, including the baby, would have died. But that guy now has to live the rest of his life knowing that he suffocated a baby. All because the Nazis and Hitler decided genetic purity is super important. So Holocaust, very, very, very bad. And believe it or not, there are people that actually deny it was a thing. So those people are dumb. All right, so next assignment you guys will have assigned will be the document analysis for this unit. And it might be due at the end of this week, or I might just make it due on the 20th to give you guys extra time to finish it. Maybe I'll have it due on the 20th. We'll figure it out. But for now, that's our last lecture for the week, so thank you for listening. Bye.